بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا الله check يا الله. بسم الله. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم الصراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. صدق الله العلي العظيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبا القاسم المصطفى محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. ما خاب من تمسك بكم وأمن من لجأ إليكم. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد وعلى أصحاب الحسين خصوصا سيدي ومولاي قمر بني هاشم أبا الفضل العباس عليه السلام. السلام عليكم جميعا يا شهداء كربلاء ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولم ير الذين كفروا أن السماوات والأرض كانتا رتقا ففتقناهما وجعلنا من الماء كل شيء حي أفلا يؤمنون. وجعلنا في الأرض رواسي أن تميد بهم وجعلنا فيها فجاجا سبلا لعلهم يهتدون. وجعلنا السماء سقفا محفوظا وهم عن آياتها معرضون. وهو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. A second salawat in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. A third with your loudest voices in honor of the Imam of our time, Al-Imam Sahib al-Asri wa zaman. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the dawn of time has placed His signs among every single one of His creations. If ever I wanted to see the signature of the Creator, I look at His creation. Whenever someone constructs something with complication and all of its complexities and all of its detail, I always look for who created this, where is their signature? because of the impressiveness, the fine tune, the fine detail, the sheer awe, and for lack of better words, awesomeness of the creation, we always look for the cause. We want to give credit where credit is due. And from the very beginning, before there was anything, God created existence clearly with the predisposition of the acknowledgement of His creation. There was an interesting study that was done in 2015 from the Anthropological Institute at the University of Oxford, and they did the research conducted by Professor Justin Bennett, where they examined over 35, and this is one of the largest case studies ever done in research. They examined over 35,000 children. They looked into the psyche from an anthropological level. On what basis do they interpret God? And they came to the conclusion that overwhelming majority of children have a natural predisposition to a creator, a type of divine authority. The research articles and pages have been published, and within the findings, this lead researcher, Dr. Justin Bennett, puts even the term al-fitra within it. The term al-fitra denotes an intrinsic, natural acknowledgement to something. So for example, it is part of the fitra of fish, such that when they are immediately born, they know how to swim. We need to be taught, right? So it's not part of our fitrah. We then teach ourselves. Fitrah meaning our intrinsic knowledge. We don't even need to be taught this. What is part of our fitrah, as opposed to the world of the fish, is we can breathe without being taught. Now, of course, what helps is a couple slaps from the doctor when you're a baby, on the back, patting, maybe you're clogged up, congested. Naturally, that newborn, the seconds it was alive, we've all been through this. The seconds you were alive, you already knew how to breathe. The process was there. Why? Because it was part of your innate, natural, intrinsic creation, the fitrah. Justin Bennett, when conducting this effort, concluded that overwhelming majority, meaning over 90% of 35,000 children had a belief of a natural predisposition of a God. They concluded, without even having the arguments or the findings or any form of background knowledge on any deity, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, in any manner, that they believe there has to be something out there. Now, I find this rather thought-provoking, that if you can bring children to teach some adults these days, it would be beneficial. Because the human being finds a natural need to know and come to the conclusion that I may not completely understand or comprehend, but I can always respect my intellect enough to know that something cannot come from nothing. I conclude that based on my observations, simply as a human being, not necessarily as a researcher, just my observations in life. And if there's anything I need to accept in my life, it's my knowledge. You can keep getting spoon-fed as long as you like, and be told to follow and do taqleed until the last day, emulation till the last day. But you are also worth your own salt. Have you ever seen something spontaneously be created? Abiogenesis. Something that emerged without the cause or need of anything else. Something independent from a dependent cause. Emerging out of nowhere. We can even research as far back to the early civilizations. There was always a type of acknowledgement to a creator. Now, they might have had maybe perverted versions of such acknowledgements. Maybe the creator was the sun god. Maybe the creator was some form of mythological entity. But there was always a need to interpret that the following did not just emerge by itself. Within the scope of Islam Ahlul Bayt, God has placed within the theological beliefs of the basic necessary interpretations of life within our values. So for example, Have you ever pondered on the ayah that many of us recite almost every single day? And I began reciting it when before we enter the lecture. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. The ayah in قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, the ayah al-ahad, that portion of that verse is indicative of something very massive, very large. But sometimes we pass through it. In fact, this entire chapter, as short as it is so valuable within your understanding of God that if you recite it 4 times, you get the same ajr as if you recited the entire Qur'an al-Kareem. One man asked one of the ulama, how often do you read the Qur'an in a day? The alim replied, I read the Qur'an 3,000 times a day. So how is that possible? I follow you, I see you, I study under you. You do not have the time to read the Qur'an. Maybe once a day at the very most, but that's even a challenge. Imagine once a day. I remember there was a campaign during the month of Ramadan, read the Qur'an in 1 day challenge. And there was a sister that volunteered for it, and she filmed herself doing it. She started, it was an Instagram live, could you imagine? She started at Fajr, it was while she was fasting too, and she finished by Fajr. It's very possible. And no, it wasn't that very quick recitation of anything. She saw and she read it. It's possible. So I gotta ask myself, if she can read it in a day, well, what's my excuse? Every now and then, is there an issue? In any case, the response came back from the scholar, no, I read it over 3,000. It's like, how? This chapter, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. It is considered that valuable in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has multiple names. Al-Ikhlas, Al-Ahad, Surat قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, Suratul Ahad. Many chapters can have different names, and that's totally normal. Why? Because this chapter discusses something called the argument of contingency. We always read it and pass through it, but you have to pause and ponder. God didn't say قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ وَاحِدٌ. He said قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, not wahid. Because we always will end up translating it as what? Say that God is one. But that's not what God said. One numerically is a digit that is quantifiable, that is dividable, that is something we can add to. It's an abstract thing. You can't find the number 1 in the world today, but you can prove it. But God didn't even say that. He said, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say that God is ahad. Al-ahadiyya, as opposed to the concept of one, stands out. Ahad tends to suggest that God is independent. God is singularly independent. That's why then God ends, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And that there is none similar in similitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The contingency argument we said earlier goes in the following: that God is independent from all needs or causes or creations. This is a beautiful concept found in many other verses of the Holy Qur'an. Did they create themselves, or did they come from no creation? Or we can look at Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah number 30. Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah number 30 brings to us the dynamics of the creation of existence and this universe in a way where it's undeniable now. Because the surah brings a challenge to the disbelievers. It already begins, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Have those who disbelieved not considered? Allah is suggesting that I've provided you spiritual reasons and evidence to believe in me, but many have rejected. I've given you intrinsic reasons. All of us have that predisposition to rationalize maybe there is something out there. Something cannot come from nothing, but you rejected. Even on a mathematical level, I can never take 0 plus 0 and expect to have a conclusion besides 0. But for some odd reason, whenever you ask those who are the largest proponents of atheism, which means the term here suggests not believing in theism, a deity of a sort, God. You were better to call yourself agnostic. Not believing, Gnosticism or Gnostic, meaning a belief in something that you're not too aware of. You plead the fifth basically. Why? Because when you go back to the origins of the universe, you say what happened then before the moment of the creation of the universe. I don't know. If you don't know, that already says you're not an atheist. Because how are you so sure it wasn't theism that created it? You should at least, at the very minimum, say, I don't know. Because you already are saying, I don't know. So the stance on the original creation should be an agnostic stance. Unless you came to a conclusion it wasn't God, I can respect that. Earlier we mentioned, La ilaha, I believe in no God, illallah, except God, is actually a commendable process for those that genuinely ended up concluding that there is no God, because they already said there is no God, they just need illallah. They need to continue that. There has to be a thoughtful effort where someone says, if I go back to the very creation of the universe, many will call it the Big Bang moment, before that what happened, I actually don't know. Bring the largest astronomers, biggest astrophysicists, the greatest think tanks and thinkers, they will literally tell you, we don't know. Then if you don't know, why are you saying, but it can't be God? You saying, I don't know, suggests agnosticism. At the very most, respectfully, call yourself someone that pleads the fifth. The Qur'an puts this to challenge, because the Qur'an is a transcendental message that goes beyond time and space. And it knows that there will be these questions posed, and these will be the biggest ones. If you don't accept the proofs from the signs of God that are around you, will you accept the proof of a scientific argument? أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, have those who disbelieved not considered? أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ Surah Al-Anbiya, Ayah 30. أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا, that the heavens, the skies, literal translation, the skies, and the earth, this planet, were all one joined entity. كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا, then we have expanded and separated them. Have those who disbelieved not considered that the skies and the earth were all one conjoined entity, and then we expanded them? What's God saying in the 7th century Arabian Peninsula to that random Bedouin that is grazing his flock and reading scripture and says, have I not considered the following? What does he perceive? What does he realize? But he is just astonished and in a state of perplexed surprise that the skies and the earth were all one joined entity, and then you separated them. That's impressive, but no more than that. Beyond that, that's all he or she can appreciate. Today, with the advancement of technology, of research, of science, this is the deadly S word, because many say the two cannot merge and marry within one another. That if you believe in science, you have to jeopardize religion. Because for the longest time, the churches have been at war with science. I will be at war with those who also complain that science has no integral role in the life of a believer of God, because that's not what my religion preached about. The following is a beautiful narration from my Imam of Ahlul Bayt, Al-Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. He says, Al-ilmu ilman, ilmu al-adyan wa ilmu al-abdan. That knowledge is two. Knowledge of religions, adyan. Adyan, deen is one, adyan is multiple. So the Imam is saying that knowledge can be divided and found in the study of religions. So don't just study your own worldview. Study others. Go, study. Because you're not someone that can say to yourself, if I was not born on the way of Ahlul Bayt, would I have found it? Or maybe it's the biggest ni'mah of Allah that I was born on the way of Allah and Ahlul Bayt, such that maybe I wouldn't have found it in any other manner. So study all other worldviews so you can generate confidence, so you can be confident. We are not a religion that says don't ask questions. The Qur'an asks so many questions and asks you to ponder. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ, and they ask you about the new moon. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ even for the men here, عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ, on the menstrual cycle. Some people need to learn these things from this side of the room. Some people need to ponder that maybe science shouldn't be restricted based on gender. Maybe science shouldn't be restricted based on what makes me feel comfortable. A true man learns and studies these things in life because they impact them, their daughters, their wives, their family. Learn and study. God says don't even feel uncomfortable to study things that are even outside of your familiar zone of your experience in life. عن المحيض, عن الأهلة, عن الساعة. يسألونك عن الساعة. They ask you about the time and the hour, the last moment and the day of judgment. يسألونك عن ذي القرنين. They ask you about the two-horned one. What's his identity? The Qur'an is saying, ask. Don't wait. Find it. That is why exactly and precisely you cannot do taqleed on usul al-din. You can't. Meaning, you cannot emulate anyone on the core foundations and fundamentals of religion. I do taqleed on the branches of religion, furu' al-din. Usul al-din, whether I look at nabuwa, whether I look at tawheed or adala, whether I look at any of these, and imamah, I don't need to do taqleed to come to the conclusion that God is la ilaha illallah, laysa kamithlihi shay. I shouldn't do taqleed in that regard. Why? Because I must come on my own terms with rationalizing that there can only be one creator. Hence why perhaps that this ayah, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ, is so stressed upon. They would say, Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, when he was in Yemen, he preached the good word of Islam in Yemen, and people in Yemen embraced Islam, mahabbatan ba'ali ibn Abi Talib, out of love for Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. He succeeded. The group that was with the Imam, when they returned to Medina, the Prophet asked them, what was your experience like in Yemen? They said, amazing, Ali ibn Abi Talib did a wonderful job. We just complain about one thing from him. What do you complain about with regards to Imam Ali? They said, he recites, look at of all things you complain about. He recites قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ too much in his salah. In his salah, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, you can read any other surah. You can read anything, by the way. After Al-Fatiha, which is the only obligatory surah you must read, you can read any surah. Kafirun, Ma'un, Baqarah, if you have the strength for it. But Ali ibn Abi Talib loved قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ. They say he just likes that. I mean, of all things to complain about. And so Rasulullah then replied, indeed, this is where the beautiful hadith comes from. This surah is 1/4 of the Qur'an. And Imam Ali could have read the whole entire Qur'an. He read 1/4 of the Qur'an. He could have picked any other chapter. He chose one that is equivalent to 1/4 of the Holy Qur'an al-Kareem. Hence why. And Rasulullah praised that. To begin with, it wasn't even something to complain about. Hence, we look at the importance of the discussion of the origins of the universe being an integral part that you must find your own conclusion to. I emulate a scholar with respect to the ahkam and the legal rulings of prayer. When is, for example, a certain phrase uttered between what, for example, the ruku' and the sujood, timing of prayer, salah that is mustahab, ghusl, jihad, the furu' ad-din, hajj, som, salah, amr bil ma'ruf, nahi anil munkar, zakat, we mentioned that earlier, khums as well, jihad. These concepts I emulate. When the scholar says, now it is the time, now it's not the time, Ramadan, now is the month, now it's not the month, the ahkam, khums, I mean, these are things I emulate. But the usul al-din, I must come to my conclusions. I can never emulate a scholar in that regard because it is an intrinsic belief already instilled inside me, already found inside me. Henceforth, God proposes the following. Do those who disbelieve, have they not considered that the skies with an S, and the earth were all one joined entity? كانتا رتقا, كان, ماضية, at the past. ففتقناهما, and then we've expanded them, separated them. وجعلنا من الماء كل شيء حي, and we created from water all living things. Already, every word that was uttered matches completely with the scientific realizations of today. You cannot have life without having water. And the planets and space-time were all one joined entity. No matter who you are, you completely acknowledge that there is an expansion going, and you can do reverse mathematics and see where it was at one point. And at the rate of expansion, it has to have been at a point so concentrated such that it can produce this degree of expansion today. Before I proceed, the Imam added that knowledge is two. Knowledge of religions, al-ilmu ilman, ilmu al-adyan wa ilmu al-abdan. And knowledge of anatomy, biology, chemistry. That discussion, the Imam shows us that you are encouraged to study and learn. Now proceeding. The ayah continued, and we created from life, water, all living things. You cannot have life without having water. Even in the area known as the Dead Sea of Jordan, as salty as it is, there are microbes that live among and around on a microscopic level that thrive on the water that is found there. Everything needs water to live. That was why we were so excited when they announced that in Mars that they found what was ancient deltas that were once flowing with water. That postulates that wherever there's water, there is life. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. Look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends the ayah. أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Will they still not believe? And you got to consider, this is a very compelling argument. Have you not considered the following? And that we created water, life from water. And that the skies and the earth were all one joined entity. And then we separated them. Will you still not believe? God doesn't implore a scientific argument for his existence constantly. There is a spiritual argument for the existence of God. The Qur'an makes mention of this constantly. There is an emotional appeal to emotion. There is a discussion of contingency. Then there is one with respect to the creation of science and the universe and the whole entire process there is. God then continues, وَجَعَلْنَا فِي الْأَرْضِ رَوَاسِيَ أَن تَمِيدَ بِهِمْ وَجَعَلْنَا فِيهَا فِجَاجًا سُبُلًا لَعَلَّهُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. And we have created on the earth mountains that act as pegs. Pegs. If you look at a mountain, it's not just the mountain. There are roots to this that go deep into the earth that form similar to the function of pegs that keep things encased with one another. And we've created paths within the mountains so that you are able to be guided. Many people use sight to be able to determine where they are, because that's literally all you have. You can see the pathways and functioning and be able to determine where to go and what to travel, especially back then. This is all they needed to depend on. Modern day pilots utilize and heavily rely on the sight of the mapping and the radar that they have in order to be able to determine what is a good flight path and a good jet stream by the shape of the topological mapping of the earth. God said back then you used it as a form of hidayah, so you can guide yourself here and there. And even today, no matter how advanced we became, we still use these things so that we can use them. Then Allah continues with a very beautiful observation. وَجَعَلْنَا السَّمَاءَ سَقْفًا مَحْفُوظًا. And we have created the sama, the sky, as a protecting ceiling. But guys, I'm not even doing tafsir here. I'm not even opening what does this mean. I am just doing outward reading. When we're reading these, are we not coming to an interesting conclusion that you're getting that really accurate, by the way? This is matching a lot of what we already know and understand that we've discovered years later that doesn't make too much sense on how some random, because this is always proposed, random Bedouin in the 7th century Arabian Peninsula who supposedly did not know how to read or write and did not have any teachers suddenly telling us that in the sky is a protecting ceiling. Saqfan mahfuza. A saqf we call ceiling, right? Mahfuza. It's not just a ceiling, it protects you. Hifaz, protects. How on earth is the sky a ceiling? If anything, the sky is that which lacks a ceiling. Because when we remove the ceiling right now, we have exposed to the sky. So how is Allah flipping it and saying, but no, the sky is also a ceiling. But it's not just a ceiling, it's a protecting ceiling. Can anyone explain what does that possibly allude to with respect to the sky being a ceiling and protecting us? The ozone layer. The ozone layer. No, you're coming to mental gymnastics and you're trying I'm just reading. I am not interpreting, I'm not doing no tafsir. Forget the world of tafasir. You and your random scholars are trying to conform. I'm just reading. Or ta'weel, I'm just reading. I can't help but notice a verse in the chapter of the prophets, Al-Anbiya, ayah number 33, where God is saying that the sky, I created it as a protecting ceiling. You may not see it now, O 7th century Arabian Peninsula. Maybe up until even the 20th century you will not be able to see it. But there is definitely something protecting you because there are harmful rays. La ilaha illallah. Harmful rays, harmful debris. Had it not been for that magnetic, amazing, beautiful, and interesting creation known as the protecting ceiling. I'm not going to jump to conclusions and say scientifically the ozone layer. I don't know what it is. I'm lost. I can't but help and see that maybe this has gotten it right. But we'll just assume coincidence. وَجَعَلْنَا السَّمَاءَ سَقْفًا مَحْفُوظًا. Beautifully. Then God wraps up that ayah and says, وَهُمْ عَنْ آيَاتِهَا مُعْرِضُونَ. But they are from its signs turning away. You know, you always hear about the concern of climate change and problems, and you know there are clear signs and things like that, and this is not entering the world of politics or activism, but I think my religion is a deen that encompasses everything there was in life, but I'm not entering that world at all. But there are clear signs out there that if we don't get our act together, we're ruining our earth, we're littering, we're polluting, we're ruining, we're burning. I mean, it was 2 years ago, half of the globe was practically on fire from the continent of Australia to elsewhere. Why? Because the insan couldn't care less about anything else, and he thinks he owns the world. No, you don't. Who are you? Owner and manifestor of everything there ever was to be cared about? No. Like how Allah looks after the creations that are in the deep depths of the ocean, you should also look after every other creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islam is a humanitarian way of life. The Prophet himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, sallu ala Muhammad wa Muhammad, single-handedly planted over 13,000 palm trees in the city of Medina alone. In the city of Medina alone. Single-handedly planted thousands. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen himself, Ali ibn Abi Talib, during the time period from when the Prophet left the world and he had his rights usurped until he achieved the public role of leadership, became the Khalifa. After about 24 years, they would say Imam was doing three things. كان علي يحفر الآبار, planting wells, ويزرع الأشجار, and he would plant trees, ويقرأ القرآن, and he would read the Qur'an. He spent in the region known as Al-Yamama planting so many trees. By the time he was finally politically in charge, he gained from the capital of those trees and used them to help become independent from the state and the treasury of the state. And this would become his inheritance to his children. We often hear stories about how some Imam of Ahlul Bayt gave a random person that was begging him 500 dinar. 500 dinar is a lot. Dinar is gold, not dirham, silver. How did you give him that much money? Where did that come from? How did you just give this guy 1,000, for example? It's because of the Imam's hard work and planting wells and trees and the emphasis on cleanliness and environmentalism. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there are signs in the world many people deliberately turn away. They go away. Just pause and think. How did this happen? Any form of change in that layer, known as the ozone layer, would introduce to us many harmful rays, many harmful exposures that would affect us. Forget the rays, the debris, space dust, comets, these things. These are signs that are out there. It's from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But God says still, there are people وَهُمْ عَنْ آيَاتِهِمْ مُعْرِضُونَ. They just turn their faces away. Then Allah hits the disbeliever with a line. I would say it's so powerful, it's deadly. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي خلق الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر كل في فلك يسبحون. He is the one who created the night. First look at the order. The night, then the day. The sun, then the moon. That order is unique. Why? Because in the actual process of the creation of these things, it was in that order. First, there was no light. هو الذي خلق الليل. Then there was a degree of light, وَالنَّهَارِ. But that light didn't emerge from the sun, because the sun is a result of the extreme gaseous clouds that have all the ingredients necessary for life. But there was a ray of emitting something out there in that early period. Al-layla wal-nahara. Then the suns came as a result of this. Wash-shamsa wal-qamara. Then the moon. What are they all doing? What is the process they're currently in? What are they doing? Kullun fi falakin yasbahun. All of which are in the state of a falak. I'm not going to say what falak means just yet. Kullun fi falakin. They are yasbahun, swimming. Oh, hold on, now your Qur'an got it wrong, because how are they swimming? It's space. Where is the water that the moon is swimming on, for example? Number one, the term falak means a type of orbit. How? This is not conforming mental gymnastics, forcing words so it can match my own worldview. No. A filka, etymologically, means a roundabout. That's all it means. A roundabout. In fact, if you were to go to the Middle East, for those who have gone, if you ever drive around an area, you reach a point, this is more common in Europe, we do have these here in the States, but you get roundabouts, where you can start a direction and go all the way around and begin one direction, but you have many options to leave from it. We call that a filka, a roundabout. Allah says that these things, the night, the day, the sun, the moon, they are all in a state of roundabout, i.e. orbit. So far the accuracy is on point, until one might ponder at the following description, yasbahun, swimming. They're not swimming. Or are they swimming? Is the sun swimming right now? Sibaha and tasbah. They're not swimming. You gotta admit, are they swimming? Someone gonna shake their head no at me, or yes?
Yes, they are.
How are they swimming? I thought swimming was water. What are they swimming in?
Space-time. The fabric of space-time.
That's not what I understand swimming to mean. But you make a good point, Ahsan. Kullun fi falak. They're in an orbit swimming. Einstein's theory of general relativity. The theory of general relativity is an interesting one, because it suggests that whenever you have mass situated in space-time, it will alter and affect the presence of another large mass near it or smaller mass. Mass situated in space-time, call it the sun, a bowling ball. The other examples of mass or things of mass nearby, say the moon, will feel the effects of the larger and more massive mass that is out there. Relative to it, it impacts it, it affects it. The general theory of relativity. What does that suggest? What links two pieces of mass in space-time? There is something out there, we can't understand it. Gravity, we might even call it dark energy, not energy, dark mass, we don't know what links it. It's empty, it's a void, but something is linking it. The best description is what the respected brother said earlier, something similar to like a fabric. Because if you were to have, say, a fabric, a bed sheet, and you were to hold it on all four corners, and you put a bowling ball in the middle, then you throw marbles at it, coming at it from an angle, the marbles will begin to orbit. Why? Because there's a heavier piece of mass in the middle. Now what happens if the wording is specifically used in the Qur'an and Allah doesn't use any word in vain, subtlety to the highest degree and point? What happens if they're put in a body of water and I have small bodies of mass floating around it? Just say ducks, okay? Ducks in water. I throw a bowling ball in the water. What will be caused from where I threw the bowling ball that will then make the ducks move, if not the sound? What will then make those move? The ripples. Because those ripples, they were caused by one piece of space mass that then affect another one if they're in the way. That link is called the fabric, because it's like a fabric of space-time. What does Allah use in the Qur'an? They are all in an orbit. When they're in an orbit, they're moving. They are in the motion similar to swimming. We call it gravitational waves. And waves are caused based on a surface that was impacted by another piece of mass. كُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. They're all in an orbit swimming. A big coincidence. A massive coincidence. Yeah, you got it right from the dot. A random Bedouin, for example, in the 7th century did not know how to read or write. Then in Surah Al-Dhariyat, ayah number 47, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالسَّمَاءَ بَنَيْنَاهَا بِأَيْدٍ وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. And the skies we've made with strength. بِأَيْدٍ is an idiom, with strong hands. وَإِنَّا, and we are the ones who are its expanders. We expand it. Indeed, the universe is expanding. No one has even brought that into the place of a theory. We can say the theory of the Big Bang theory, but the expansion of space is fact. Space is expanding, not just expanding, at an accelerating rate. It's just getting faster. You can do reverse mathematics in that and see if you are moving quickly, because you can just observe. You literally can see it. You put your telescopes and you measure the light of a particular star, then you can see it 50 years later, and they did these tests. The James Webb discovery actually concluded the following test. From the time they sent Hubble, Allah rahmah, the time they sent that guy, that telescope, they saw that there are stars that are dimmer, and some stars that are now brighter. What got these stars dimmer? Which ones are brighter? The expansion of space-time has a massive effect on these things. So they say, if we can do the math, how much was this reduced? How much was it reduced to the point where when we observed it brighter, how much should it take in distance to get that light and dim? They concluded the following numbers. These numbers equaled the speed of light. That's where they came up with that beautiful conclusion. And this is all beautiful. Honestly, there's nothing wrong. I might not subscribe to that same worldview that says the universe is 9,000 years old and that Christ walked with the dinosaurs, because I don't read text fundamentalistically. You know, they asked, I remember the former vice president, because he's an evangelist and he's a firm believer in God, which is a good thing. They asked his personal priest, because he brought a priest to the White House and he would be the head of the religious affairs. He, the vice president, has the power to choose who he wants to occupy that position. They asked that priest, what do you think the age of the universe is? He's like, literally 9,000 years old. Well, 9,000 years old. Like, why? He said, because the scripture said God created the world in 6 days. Now, the Qur'an, we have something similar to that, but we don't interpret it as earth days, because if there was no earth, what day are you talking about? We can describe that, and the tafsir are very clear about that, by the way, the days of God. And God's days, we can look at, for example, one hadith of God says, Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day of judgment, is equivalent to 50,000 years of our regular days. So if God says spend 2 days in Jahannam, you can do the math and see what that's like. But we can see these as levels as well, stages. Stage 1, stage 2. And God, if He decides to have a system, He can make a system. Or إِذَا أَرَادَ أَمْرًا إِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُونْ فَيَكُونُ. He can do instant, or He can create a system. And God, in this process, made a system. Without the system, we would not be discussing today. Because God could have easily said, create universe, planet starts. Like God could have easily made you born an adult, but He wanted you to go through stages. Stages, a phase, an embryonic phase, and very specific. He spoke about it in the Qur'an. First you were a zygote, then you formed into what is a mixture of meat and blood. Then from that to bone, from bone to a consciousness. ثُمَّ أَنشَأْنَاهُ خَلْقًا آخَرَ. Then we added another creation inside of that development, which is the soul. And in that moment, you were then created. Then you're born, then you go through stages. I could have easily said, hey, you could have just done kun fayakun and made me. But no, there's a system. God created the world like it's a baby in a system. And then there are things in life God can create immediately. This is the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Dhariyat, ayah 47, God says, and the skies we created with strength, because it takes strength to create something like this. And we, وَإِنَّا لَمُوسِعُونَ. It becomes so blunt and serious. And we are its expanders. Why would God talk about expansion of the skies? What's so important about that? Because no matter how much we research on the expansion of space-time, it always confuses us. We called even the phenomenon, the process is dark energy. We call it dark because we can't smell it, see it, measure it. observe it. We can't put it in a lab. We just don't know. It's dark energy. Why is it dark energy? Something is propelling space-time to not only expand, but get faster. When you have that initial kaboom from the Big Bang, at this point you should slow down, but you're actually getting faster. So what's making the speed increase? We call it some sort of dark energy. We don't know. It's dark energy. It's dark. We don't know. But it's definitely there. Allah says, I'm the one doing it. I'm the one making it happen. We can always say that God did everything. But to someone that has no root of a degree of God, it's always a cop-out answer. You can answer your questions by saying God. But how did you ever reach such a conclusion? Put the Qur'an aside. The argument of contingency, which is to suggest the following. I and you, we are dependent. We need something to come into existence and be caused. But that thing, say for example my parents, they are also dependent. So we return back to a regress of dependent things. We get to a point where we finally come to a single moment called the singularity of space-time, where that was the cause of everything else. But then past that point, we don't know. Some will suggest that it's an infinite regress. You cannot have an infinite regress of dependent things. Why not? Because you would not have begun already. If there is a limit to one end, there has to be a finite beginning. If there's a finite end here, there can't be an infinite beginning there. Because already the phrase doesn't add. You can't have an infinite beginning. Because beginning means it started. An infinite beginning would be trying to have a square circle or a square triangle. It's a possibility that's impossible. It's possible, but it's impossible at the same time. So we can't conclude that mathematically. Why are we accepting it? If I have respect for my intellect, I have to say, well, there has to be something. That if everything is dependent on something which was also dependent on something else, what has to cause it must be independent. Independent, but also strong to cause all this. Not just strong, the word is wrong. Powerful. Omniscient and omnipotent. Benevolent we'll put to the side right now. But a very powerful beginning that has to be independent. Because if you say that it was all infinite and it returns, infinity, does it have an end? No. Then why is it the end right now? I have yet to cause, for example, my next 5 generations. So there's an end at the end, but there's no end at the beginning. That doesn't add. If we only say, give me science, but right here we accepted that this can be possible, then why are we picking and choosing what we want to have faith in? And I have a problem with the term faith. Because faith denotes the belief in something with the absence of evidence. No, I want to have evidence. Because I want to believe. I have haqq. I want to have truth. If there's an end to it from this point right now, how can there be an infinity from the start? And that wouldn't even match because you can't have a start and it's infinity at the same time. So it has a finite beginning because it sure has a finite end on me right now. And on you right now. So there has to have been something that must be independent. That was the first cause. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Then, everything returns back to as its original source, i.e. a refuge. Allahu Samad, the eternal refuge. You all returned back to Him. You all sourced yourself from Him. As-Samadiyya means everything depended on that. As an eternal refuge. In the manner of dependency. I depend on you. You know, like a refugee depends on the pastures new to have their life. Allah says, Allahu Samad. Allahu is the one that everything dependent on. The contingency argument explained. But we just read it like it's another, here, just read it, pass, get it over with. Teach the kids maybe. Done. If you ever paused in the prayer and pondered, you would open yourself to a renaissance of ilm and hikmah. Lam yalid, was never born. Walam yulad, does not give birth. Further describing what this original cause is. Walam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad. Some people say it's kuf'an ahad. No, it's wrong grammatically. It's not kuf'an or kufwin. This is just, by the way, on the side of Nahu wa Sarf. Kufuwan ahad. And there is none in similitude to Him. Because we can argue all of this, but some can say, well, there could be 2 gods. No, God says, no, none can be like Him. Because if that was the case, then you would have 2 gods. One would occupy one form, another would occupy the other form. The other cannot be the same one, so a cannot denotes limitation. And that which is limited is not worthy of being worshipped. Rabbul Alameen displays all this. I will wrap up with one last and final tradition before we conclude, inshallah, with the wonderful lessons in Saga of Karbala. One man came to Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. The hadith is found in Al-Kafi of Al-Allama Al-Shaykh Al-Kulaini, radwanullahi alayh. And the narrator is Hisham Al-Khaffaf. Hisham Al-Khaffaf was a scholar of astronomy. You know, the sad thing is the term astronomy the term astrology has been hijacked by horoscope people, because ologies mean the study of, biology, etc. So astro, the study of space. But today, if you do a search on what is astrology, you get your zodiac sign. So, of course, Pisces are the best, but now we have to resort to astronomy to mean the science of space, astrophysics, and so forth. Hisham al-Khaffaf was a scholar in the field of astronomy. And he approached Al-Imam al-Sadiq, alayhi salam. Of course, Imam al-Sadiq, if we're just looking at secularly, was an erudite scholar of absolutely every field of science possible. Fiqh, theology, history, mathematics, chemistry. Jabir al-Hayyan, the founder of modern Islamic chemistry, founder of chemistry in general, he's on the Iraqi note in the back. He was the one that proposed for us sulfuric acid being a necessity in what is now common day batteries. He proposed the idea in his research of what can be a battery. He was a student of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. In any case, Imam al-Sadiq was approached by this man, and the Imam said to him, Ya Jab, Ya Hashim, Kayfa basaruka bin nujum? How is your sight in the stars? Which is to say, what is your knowledge of the stars like? Are you knowledgeable? Hisham says, Ya Abu Abdullah, ما خلفت بالعراق أبصر بالنجوم مني. I have not left anyone in Iraq more knowledgeable than the stars than I am. He says Iraq because back then Iraq was the hub of the Islamic Golden Age, and in Baghdad they called it Baytul Ilm, the house of knowledge. That's where Plato's Republic was translated, by the way, from the ancient Greek to Arabic. We lost the ancient Greek text of Plato's Republic. The earliest manuscripts of Plato's Republic are in Arabic. We have them in Arabic. Where? During the Islamic Golden Age, which happened at around the Abbasid period during the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. So when he says, I have not left Iraq except that I'm the most knowledgeable, he's saying in the whole world, because that was the hub, that was the Oxford, Harvard, that was the UPenn, that was the NYU, right? Of that time. So I'm the most knowledgeable in astronomy in all of Iraq. Al-Imam al-Sadiq says to him, إِذَنْ كَيْفَ دَوَرَانُ الْفَلَكِ عِنْدَكُمْ? How does the universe, that word falak, orbit, how does the universe orbit in your opinion? So discussion that was happening. How does the universe orbit? Hisham al-Khaffaf says, فَأَخَذْتُ قَلِنْسُوَتِي عَنْ رَأْسِي فَأَدَرْتُهَا. I took my cap from my head and I began to revolve it around my head. The cap represented the universe. The qalinsua is the cap. My head represented the earth. So the universe revolved around the earth, right? So he says, that's my interpretation about how the universe functions. It revolves around the earth, which was the common opinion back then, that they thought the earth was at the center of the universe. It revolves around me. Imam al-Sadiq hits back. He says, this is Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, by the way. This is a discovery that preceded any other academic discovery. He says, where? In Al-Kafi, not some rogue, you're making up a hadith that came about 100 years ago. No. إن كان الأمر على ما تقول فما بال بنات نعش والجدي والفرقدين لا يرون يدورون يوما من الدهر في القبلة. If the case was as you described, then what about the North Star, Polaris? How come we have never seen it revolve one day in history? Because if the universe revolves around the earth, the North Star, which is on the exact tip of the global polar axis, right there, when you look up into the sky, all the stars revolve except one. That's called the North. star. It's situated. If the universe revolved around the earth, that would also move. But it stays in its spot. Try this at night. Not in New York, you can never see the stars, for goodness sake. Although you might be looking on right now. But in any case, if you go somewhere rural, without brothers, sisters, please, without any, there's a guy in the back who's never smiled. Right now, I see him for the first time in his life. If you try this in some rural area, mission accomplished, and you put your phone facing the sky, and you put it on like time lapse, I think, setting on your phone. After like a few hours, and you play it, the sky moves quickly, right? Time lapse is how it works. You can see the stars go like this, quickly, but there's one in the dead center that doesn't move. That's the North Star. Imam As-Sadiq says, what about that one? If the universe revolves around the earth, that should move. But it shows that the universe and the earth are together in motion. What does Hisham al-Khafaf say? Wallah, هذا شيء لا أعرفه ولا سمعت أحدا من أهل الحساب يذكره. By Allah, this is something I have no clue, and I haven't heard anyone of knowledge and record ever mention it before. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, alayhi salam, the 7th century alim, we could just call him alim right now, non-conventional, inspired through this hadith a scholar, a polymath, by the name of Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi. Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi, famous scholar in Iran. He was a scholar in many fronts, chemistry, mathematics, and deen, but particularly astrophysics. Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi mentions, I propose that the universe is not revolving around the earth. Imam al-Sadiq had a good point on this. Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi inspired the famous Italian thinker Nicholas Copernicus. If you read Nicholas Copernicus's diary, he has personal pages that he writes his thoughts. He says literally the name that Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi's suggestion about the placement of the cosmos makes the most sense to me. Nicholas Copernicus inspired Galileo Galilei with his proposition that the earth is not the center of the universe. He got the achievement for that, but it was none other than Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq who began it. Don't give me the student, give me the teacher, for goodness sake. You gotta give credit where credit is due. You have to. But and the man, by the way, was persecuted because of his scientific finding, and his library burnt, Galileo Galilei, and the church persecuted him because that conflicted with the Vatican's opinion about the placement of the universe, and they called him a heretic, and he was this close from being executed, if not for the court case ruling in his favor that, hey, promise us no more writing stuff, no more. Until they officially apologized in the 20th century. Galileo, we're sorry, we went to the space. We went and we saw, literally, we saw. What can we say? And they actually, at that time, issued a formal apology years later. But don't worry, Ahlul Bayt will talk about these, but no one will mention and give credit where credit is due. And inshallah ta'ala, the horizon has been seen, no pun intended. We will cross those boundaries, and I need to see, inshallah, Muslim thinkers, scholars, Muslim women scholars break more boundaries, for goodness sake. We need to see more astrophysicists. We need to see more scientists, because you can confidently say that my deen is the one that encourages this, and don't think you have to sacrifice science for religion or religion for science. As profound as these are from the Qur'an, from the world of narration, from the descriptions of God that we discussed everywhere on an ontological level, take your hearts to the event of Karbala, because this is truly the culmination of all of these beliefs. This we would not have today had it not been for that stance and that waqfa on the 10th of Ashura. Particularly on a day like today, we honor a man, should I say a young man, who he had the whole world ahead of him, and he had his whole life coming to him, and he had the universe to explore, basically, for lack of better words. But he decided to sell it for the akhirah. He said, I can sell this world because I think there's a better world out there. And when his uncle, Hussein ibn Ali, alayhi salam, saw him in deep thought, that 14-year-old, he said to him, my beloved nephew, you're on this journey, and it's not going to be an easy journey. you've lost your father, and that wasn't an easy loss. How do you see death? And the young boy replied beautifully, Ya Am, إن الموت بين يديك أحلى عندي من العسل. Oh my beloved uncle, death between your hands is sweeter than honey to me. Allah, Allah. Gather anyone in the world, across the universe, who can formulate a sentence as beautiful when asked about how they see death than Qasim, son of Imam Al-Hassan Al-Mujtaba. Al-Qasim, alayhi salam, lost his father already, and he had no one besides his uncle. His uncle was his universe. His uncle was his world. His uncle was everything he had. But of course, naturally, like any uncle, you yearn for your nephews and nieces, but particularly that one. Why? Because he was his only living memory of his brother Imam Al-Hassan alayhi salam. And so when the day came of Ashura, Al-Qasim approaches Aba Abdullah and says, Oh my uncle Hussein, let me go and fight. Ali al-Akbar has fought already. He was the first one in the family to fight and was martyred. I want to follow on the footsteps of my cousin. There's always a cousin relationship that I follow, that I love, and I saw my cousin give his life. Let me sacrifice. It's my turn now. Imam al-Hussein immediately says, No, because you are to me like an amana, a trust from your father, my brother Imam al-Hassan, and you're my only living memory of him, and I love you greatly. I can't just send you off like that. Please go back. Al-Qasim returns back to his mother Ramla. His mother says to him, You returned? Al-Qasim says he refused, and he was actually stressed and depressed as a result of that. Why didn't he let me go? I want to represent my father on this day. When he said those lines, according to a tradition by Kashfi's Al-Rawda, mentions that his mother said, You mentioned that you want to represent your father, there's something. She came with the imama of Imam Al-Hassan alayhi salam, his turban. And she said, Here, put this on. This young 14-year-old. And she said, according to other traditions, she gave him a written letter by Imam Al-Hassan himself, saying to Al-Qasim that when it's the day, open this letter and show it to your uncle, my brother, Imam Al-Hussein. Al-Qasim goes to his uncle, holding the sword of his father, wearing the imama and armor of his father, and Imam Al-Hussein can't help but cry, because now he sees his brother walking to him, not his nephew any longer. Salamullahi alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Al-Qasim goes and he says, Oh beloved uncle, here's a note. I was told not to read it or look into it until the day comes. I think today is that day. Imam Al-Hussein takes the note and he sees, according to a tradition, that it was the writing of Imam Al-Hassan saying, My beloved brother Hussein, let my son make me proud on that day you are lonely. And so now Imam Al-Hussein can't refuse, and he is heartbroken and covering his face, Salamullah alayh, from the tears. Al-Qasim, he consents to him, go out. When he goes out to fight, before he begins the battle, beautifully, with utmost eloquence and articulation, he begins to introduce himself, because there are many on the opposition who would say, Who is that young boy? And what does he do? And then he began to say, إن تنكروني فأنا نجل الحسن صبط النبي المصطفى المؤتمن هذا حسين كالأسير المرتهن بين أناس لاصقوا صوب المزن. If you don't know who I am the son of Hassan al-Mujtaba. I will defend my uncle Hussein as he stands looking like a captive wandering all alone from the people who don't fear Allah or the last day. Al-Qasim goes, begins to fight. One of the men say, look at how he approaches us. كَأَنَّهُ الْبَدْرُ فِي لَيْلَةِ تَمَامِهِ وَكَمَالِهِ. He looks like a radiating moon in its completion and glory. As he begins to fight valiantly, Al-Qasim's sandal snaps. When it snaps, Al-Qasim goes to adjust it. Every time he brings down one of the enemies of Allah, he looks at his uncle Imam Al-Hussein. hoping to see that he made him proud, representing his father Imam al-Hassan. But this time, as he goes to adjust that sandal, one of the mala'een and those who don't fear Allah came and lunged his sword over the head of Qasim alayhi salam. When he got hit, Al-Qasim called out, Amma adrikni, uncle, come and aid me. Come and aid me, for now I have fallen. Imam al-Hussein runs to his beloved boy. He goes to him, he removes the enemies of Allah from around him, and he begins to cradle Al-Qasim, saying, Oh my beloved nephew, how difficult is it that you call your uncle and he cannot help you in front of his eyes, but how more challenging it is that when he comes to help you, he is of little help. مأتم الحسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين